In the book of Leviticus, chapter 16, we find something strange. The Israelites, who worship only their patron deity of Yahweh, are making sacrifice to a mysterious figure named Azazel. This demon, who lives in a pit in the wilderness, is the only being besides Yahweh to whom the Israelites are allowed to offer sacrifice. Yet, despite his obvious importance, he is conspicuously absent from the remainder of the Old Testament. Who is he? Why is he in the wilderness? Why is he not mentioned elsewhere? And why must the Israelites make sacrifice to a demon? These questions had no satisfactory answers until September of 1769, when the Scottish explorer James Bruce landed in Ethiopia in search for the source of the Nile. There, among the natives, he found something ancient and unexpected. In this distant land, James Bruce happened upon a lost sect of Christianity, previously unknown to the Western world. And in their possession was a book which claimed to have been written by the grandfather of Noah. I'm your host, Jason, and you're listening to Dragons in Genesis. To this day, no one is exactly sure how or when Christianity spread to Ethiopia. The leading hypothesis is that in the 4th or 5th centuries, when Christianity became the state religion of Rome and began persecuting sects which they deem unorthodox, some of these groups fled to distant parts of the empire and beyond. One such group made its way to Ethiopia, and there, beyond the reach of the central church, they flourished. But no one knows for certain. What we do know is that the Book of Enoch is part of the Old Testament in Christian Bibles in Ethiopia, and is seen as an important part of the text. Now, in this episode, when I say the Book of Enoch, I'm referring to a book entitled 1 Enoch, which is the Ethiopian Book of Enoch. This is the oldest surviving Enochic literature. Another Book of Enoch, referred to as 2 Enoch, was discovered in Eastern churches, but it's a later work, and though it's important, it will not be covered in this series. Beyond that is other Enochic literature with even later dates. We'll be focused solely on 1 Enoch, which I'll refer to simply as the Book of Enoch. During his travels, James Bruce purchased copies of the books that he found in Ethiopia and paid scribes daily wages to copy those books the natives were hesitant to part with. These books included Enoch as well as other books found in their Old Testament. These were sent home, and Enoch was eventually fully translated into English in 1821. Later, in 1886, part of 1 Enoch was discovered in a Christian cemetery in Egypt. Unlike Bruce's copy, this version was written in Greek. We now had Enoch in multiple languages preserved by 2 very different groups of Christians on the African continent, separated by over 1,500 miles. In 1893, the Irishman Robert Henry Charles published his translation of Enoch, which proved to be more accurate than the 1821 version. Later, in 1912, he would produce a second edition, which still stands today as the standard translation. The oldest copies could only be traced back to the 5th or 6th centuries AD, but biblical scholars, Charles included, believed that the Book of Enoch may have dated back to the 1st century AD or even older, though there was no direct evidence to prove this. Finally, in 1952, fragments of 1 Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. This discovery placed 1 Enoch firmly in the 2nd century BC, with some fragments possibly dating to the 3rd century BC, as old as the oldest copies of any book in the Old Testament. But what is the Book of Enoch? Enoch is a classic example of apocalyptic writing in line with the Book of Daniel or Revelation, though parts of Enoch, such as the Book of Watchers, may well predate Daniel by centuries. I have my own opinions on this, but I'll leave them out for now. The book was rejected by mainstream Judaism, though seems to have been important to many other groups such as the Essenes, Ebionites, and Samaritans. It was widely published and used, with fragments found on 3 continents and references to its material turning up in both Judaism and Christianity. The Book of 1 Enoch is comprised of 5 sections. The first is the Book of Watchers, which covers chapters 1 through 36, though the first 5 chapters are an introduction that's mostly ignored when the book is studied. I personally feel that this omission has caused a great many people to overlook certain details which are crucial to understanding the theology presented in Enoch, and we'll be discussing my theory in detail later on. The Book of Watchers tells the story of the sons of God who came down from heaven. Their actions are responsible for evil in the world. This gave rise to the Nephilim, a race of giant human-angel hybrids which prompted the worldwide flood as a means of dealing with this race of monsters. The second book is called The Similitudes of Enoch, and covers chapters 37 to 71. It contains 3 separate visions of the Great Judgment. Heavenly forces cast judgment on the wicked, and this judgment is presided over by a mysterious figure called the Son of Man, whose identity is revealed to Enoch near the end of the book. Chapters 72 to 82 are referred to as the Astronomy Book. The Ethiopic text seems complete, though it is apparently a shortened version, as the fragments discovered in Qumran reveal. These fragments contain verses and detail which isn't preserved in the Ethiopic copy. Sadly, they're only fragments, and the full depth of detail which once existed in this portion is likely lost forever. The Astronomy Book calculates the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, and uses a complex astronomical system to track the seasons in what is possibly the most detailed solar calendar of its time. This text reveals why ancient writers once stated that the Jews were accomplished astronomers, a compliment you'd never expect if you read the Old Testament. The fourth book is the Book of Dreams, which covers chapters 83 to 90. This short section is divided into 2 visions related to Methuselah by his father Enoch. In the first vision, Enoch predicts the upcoming destruction of the earth. The second vision lays out the history of Israel, told as a series of interactions between various animals and men, and this section is known as the Animal Apocalypse. Finally is the Epistle of Enoch in chapters 91 to 104. Of all the sections in Enoch, this one most closely resembles the Old Testament in style, specifically the books of the prophets. It's filled with threats against the sinners and encouragement for the elect and the righteous. We get our first glimpse of the promise of eternal life and a strong polemic against the Second Temple. The Book of Enoch is not only remarkable for what it contains, such as ideas that men can become angels, and the concept of eternal life, but also for what is missing. Enochic theology has no place for many prominent Jewish ideas, such as the elaborate sacrificial cult of the Old Testament. There's no role for the law of Moses, no emphasis on the Promised Land, and no quotation of the Old Testament except for a single line of one song. It's a Jewish work that seems strangely anti-Jewish. It's filled with Christian ideas, though it was written centuries too early. The book is deeply concerned with the Messiah and anointed kings. Its foundation is a complex angel theology. And at its core is the promise of some profound judgment, and the entire story is told through prophetic visions, the likes of which were rejected by the Deuteronomic reform. But why is Enoch important? Why should we care about this book that isn't included in either testament? If it was rejected by the Jerusalem temple and the Christians of Rome, Why should we include it? Because Enoch contains a great many ideas that the Old Testament authors wish to conceal. Ideas which were once part of their history and their theology. We're told in the Old Testament that evil comes from disobeying a list of commandments written in stone, or as a result of violating a land deal. Or evil comes from turning one's back on Yahweh and worshiping idols, or for not donating to the temple. Sometimes evil comes directly from Yahweh himself, as he decides to punish or to test his followers for no apparent reason. But in Enoch, there is no ambiguity or debate on the topic. Evil comes from rebellious angels who corrupted the divine creation. And this origin story of evil is briefly referenced in Genesis, though the passage seems to have been edited to obscure that fact. The themes of royal judgment, which were prominent among the ancient Israelites, are downplayed in the Old Testament. But why? Because they were part of a theology no longer compatible with the Reformed Temple, along with the Canaanite festivals that served as a foundation of the most important days on the Jewish calendar. A calendar which the new temple could no longer properly calculate, as they based their counting off of lunar cycles instead of the movements of the sun. And this may have been the greatest sin of all. Enoch also contains ideas which were central to New Testament authors. In fact, Enoch was not preserved by Jewish communities. It was the Christians that carried Enoch with them following the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. Like the Christians, the writers of Enoch were at odds with the Second Temple. They rejected the authority of the high priest, a position they once revered. They rejected the animal sacrifice cult, and they even imagined the temple's destruction, which was a blasphemy among Jews, but celebrated by some Christians, as we see in the Book of Revelation. It almost seems as though Christianity was a continuation of the belief system found in Enoch, instead of an offshoot of Old Testament theology. And perhaps it was. Either way, the fact that this book was referenced and quoted more times by New Testament authors than any book of the Old Testament illustrates the need to study it if we are to truly understand the context of the New Testament. So let's get started. The Book of Watchers begins with the blessing of Enoch and a bit of stage setting. This covers the first 5 chapters and only takes up a few pages. And by a few, I mean like 2. With footnotes and references, 3. In it, Enoch is blessing the elect and the righteous. The elect are the chosen people, and predestination is part of Enochic theology. Now, the chosen people are not necessarily the Israelites. As we will see later, there are many Israelites who are not among the elect. The chosen people are the adherents to the correct theology. And this term, the elect, should not be confused with the elect one, which is a messianic figure which we'll discuss later. Unlike the elect, the righteous aren't chosen, but are people who are on the same side as the elect. They might not even be Israelites, as we'll see in later episodes. Enoch, the entire book, is a great conflict between two sides. El Elyon, Yahweh, the Son of Man, the elect, and the righteous are all allied against the forces of evil. Standing against them are Simahazah, Azael, the enemies of Israel, and Israelites who have been led astray. There is no middle ground. In that and many other details, Enoch is similar to Zoroastrianism. Enoch is blessing the elect and the righteous, though it is not occurring in his own lifetime. The people receiving his blessing are those people who will be alive in the day of tribulation. We'll get into the day of tribulation a bit later, but right now we need to discuss time. Time is strange in the Book of Enoch. Enoch was alive before the flood. He's Noah's grandfather. But here he is blessing people who will be alive in the distant future. As we'll see in this book, Enoch can exist outside of time. He also exists outside of the physical creation. But we'll talk about that a bit more in future episodes when we talk about the Son of Man, who will oversee the Great Judgment. So, Enoch's eyes are opened by El Elyon. Now, opening one's eyes means that person has received divine knowledge. Blindness, on the other hand, means one is enthralled by evil and has been led astray. As his eyes are opened, Enoch receives a vision of the Holy One, and this vision is not for him or the current generation, but for that generation in the distant future whom he has blessed. Now, you may be wondering who this Holy One is. The terms Holy One, Great Holy One, and Holy Great One are all names for El Elyon, the God Most High and the Father of Yahweh. Though in some parts, the two gods have been merged into one, and Holy One can also mean Yahweh, though in Enoch he is usually referred to as the Lord of Spirits. These books were written over an unknown period of time, and during that time their beliefs evolved, and that's why you have names for two different gods or the one God merged together. Now, please get accustomed to the idea that one entity can have multiple names, such as the 3 different names for El Elyon that we just covered. And please bear with me as we unpack all of this information, as the book is quite dense and so far we've only covered the first 2 sentences. So the Great Holy One will exit his dwelling and walk the earth. When he does this, the mountains and hills will be flattened. This image, the flattening of mountains and hills at the end times, is mentioned in Zoroastrianism, along with valleys rising up. El Elyon comes down to earth with his holy ones. Holy ones, not to be confused with the Holy One, are other gods, the sons of God or the sons of El, also called angels. Sometimes they are created angels, the stars created by El Elyon in Genesis chapter 1. And in other places they are righteous people who have become angels. So El Elyon comes down from heaven with his army of 10,000 holy ones to judge and destroy the wicked. Just from this short introduction, it is obvious that we're dealing with an apocalyptic book, in both senses of the word. This is a book of knowledge revealed to Enoch in visions, and it deals with the eschaton, the end of the world. This idea of the wicked being punished while the righteous are rewarded is straight out of Zoroastrianism, and this scene is referenced in Revelation 21. And this scene of God marching at the head of 10,000 angels to destroy the wicked is also referenced in Jude chapter 1 verses 14 to 15. Though there, the God is Yahweh instead of his father El. Still with me? Good. Chapter 2 begins stating how the world is unchanging. This continues on through chapter 5. It starts with the luminaries, the great lights of the sky, and reads, "Observe the lights in the sky and how they obey their strict orbits. Everything in the sky is orderly. Consider how all the luminaries do not transgress their appointed order." These chapters use this style of language as if the reader should meditate on the idea that certain objects move in a particular manner. Observe this and consider that. The text continues to point out how the world and the seasons obey a strict schedule, which has been laid out by God. This continues through the next 5 chapters, describing the changing of the seasons, the ripening of fruit on the trees, the movements of the sea and how it obeys its borders, how the rivers move along a predetermined course, and so on. This stage setting is not here to show how calm the world was before the fallen angels corrupted the earth. This section, the first 5 chapters, is important. I can't stress that enough. Explaining how the universe is steadfast and unchanging, and the stars were orderly, may seem like nothing more than bland background information. But after studying Enoch, I have come to believe that this overlooked introduction is crucial in understanding the entire theology of Enochic literature. I believe chapter 5, verse 4, and the third portion of 1 Enoch, the astronomy book, will make all of this clear. But it will take a great bit of time to explain, and you'll need much more background information to fully grasp the meaning. Just accept that this introduction is crucial, and everything that follows, the idea that the stars and their movements in the sky are supposed to be set and unchanging, is important to the authors, and that is why it's included. It isn't just stage setting. The forces of nature obey the commandments, the covenant of creation. The commandments here does not refer to the law of Moses. Enochic theology has no place for the law code of Moses, and Moses himself holds no great importance to the followers of this tradition. Here, commandments and covenants in Enoch aren't stone tablets. They're not a civil law code. The covenant is the written word which governs the universe. 1 Enoch 5:3 states that the sea is held in place by the word, and that the rivers maintain their course by the commandments. The covenant is the computer code that describes creation, the rails that guide the stars across the heavens, and the power that binds the pillars that support the disk of the world and the dome of the firmament. These are the laws that organize the universe, not something you can write in stone and place in a box. After telling us how the luminaries and the earth obey the covenant, Enoch changes his message. In 1 Enoch 5:4, he addresses the transgressors. You have never obeyed the commandments of Yahweh. You have spoken hard words with your unclean mouth. You shall find no peace. Verse 6 states that you are godless, revealing that this is part of some theological dispute. Verse 7 reads that the elect shall rejoice and find forgiveness of sins, mercy, and peace. They shall find salvation. And in verse 8 it states that the elect will inherit the earth, a sentiment which is reflected in Matthew 5:5. We learn that the elect will be given wisdom, which will make them humble and prevents them from engaging in sin. They shall not be killed by God's wrath, and they'll be rewarded with long life. This belief, the reward of a long mortal life, will later be replaced with eternal life in the heavens as their theology evolves. And this section implies that their theological opponents, those wicked men who are godless, will have none of the things mentioned as rewards for the elect and the righteous. They shall have no peace and will find no salvation. They'll lose their position of power so the elect may inherit, and they are blind, not possessing of divine wisdom. They're sinners, and thus will suffer God's wrath during the day of tribulation that is to come. This is a theological dispute between one sect of Judaism, who feels displaced, and the current ruling class, who has offended God with their strange practices. This idea will become more clear as we continue our study of Enoch. The Book of Watchers truly kicks off in chapter 6. This book contains 2 separate traditions regarding the Watchers and the origins of evil. These 2 stories are interwoven into a single narrative that concludes in chapter 10. Chapters 6 and 7 concern the angel Semihaza, and some form of this story was known to the compilers of Genesis, but it was edited down to just 4 short verses in the beginning of Genesis chapter 6. It reads, "When men began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of El saw how beautiful the daughters of man were, and so they took for their wives as many of them as they chose. Then Yahweh said, My breath shall not remain in man forever, since he is but flesh. His days shall comprise 120 years. At that time the Nephilim appeared on earth, after the sons of El went into the daughters of man, who then bore them sons. They were the giants of old, the men of renown." Scholars have remarked that this text is choppy, and it hints that much has been removed. This short passage is listed as the reason for the flood, but the legend behind it has been removed from the Old Testament. The other tradition, found in chapter 8 of Enoch, tells us of the angel Azazel, but to avoid confusion, we'll come back to him in a moment. Let's go back to Semihaza in chapter 6. As the children of men multiplied on the earth, they had daughters whom the sons of El lusted after. Semihaza bound 200 of El's sons to him with an oath, and they departed heaven to land atop Mount Hermon, the highest point in Israel, during the time of Enoch's father Jared. These angels who departed heaven to live on earth are mentioned in Jude chapter 1 verse 5 through 6. Enoch chapter 6 verses 7 through 8 lists the angels who were leaders under Semihaza. Each angel listed was leader of a group of 10. Among these leaders under Semihaza is Azazel, though later Azazel will have his own story in which he is the leader and Semihaza plays only a small role. Many of the angels listed here have theophoric names, which connect them directly to their father El, such as Ramael, Danel, Aziel, and Zachael. It should be noted here that Danel was a prominent hero in Canaanite mythology well before these stories were written, though there's no evidence that the Danel listed here is connected in any way to the Danel of Canaanite mythology apart from the name. These sons of El, who abandoned heaven to live on earth, were known as the Watchers, hence the title of the book. They all took human wives and had sex with them, creating a race of demigods known as the Nephilim, who grew to enormous size. This is referenced in Jubilees chapter 7 verses 21 to 25. These giants weren't like those mentioned in the books of Samuel, like Goliath. They measured 3,500 cubits tall. That's 4,500 feet for the Americans and 1.37 kilometers for the rest of the universe, or as tall as 794 refrigerators. These giants quickly consumed all the produce on Earth and then began to sin against the animals by eating them. If you recall the story of Noah, no one ate meat prior to the flood. These giants also began eating people, and when that wasn't enough, they committed another taboo by drinking each other's blood. Their crimes against nature were so great that the earth itself cried out its accusation against the Nephilim. This conflict with nature is mentioned in the Book of Jasher, chapter 2, verses 19 to 22, and the earth accusing the murderer is also seen in the Cain and Abel story of Genesis chapter 4. The text suddenly cuts to the second tradition of the Watchers, that of Azazel, and the gift of forbidden knowledge. Azazel's story begins in chapter 8, and has only a single brief mention of Semihaza, and no mention at all of an oath between the sons of El. Here Azazel is the leader of the angels, and his tale isn't one of lust and demigods, but of forbidden knowledge which corrupts creation. Azazel teaches humans metalworking and how to craft weapons. He also taught them how to make jewelry fitted with precious stones, and the use of cosmetics to beautify the eyes of women, and how to dye fabrics. This forbidden knowledge caused people to turn from El and become corrupt. This may seem like a strange list of areas of study which caused the downfall of creation, but it's actually quite significant. The author here is expressing a dim view of war, riches, and fine clothing, which are all prominent features of the story of Moses. They are also prominent features of the Second Temple priests. Other sons of God who follow Aziel, included Semihaza, teach more forbidden knowledge, such as spells and counterspells, herbalism, constellations and portents, which is reading meaning from the stars and constellations. While these things were allowed in their theology, they were meant to come from God and to be used properly. But here the knowledge was given by evil, and thus it would be used for evil. Aziel would be seen later in the similitudes in chapter 55 as the leader of the Watchers, and again in the Book of Dreams, where it is said he is the first of the stars to fall from heaven. That same story also suggests that it was Aziel who was responsible for giving divine knowledge to Adam and Eve in Genesis 2 through 3. And of course, he's our desert demon mentioned in Leviticus chapter 16, as part of the scapegoat ritual. In chapter 9, our two tales of the Watchers were merged. The cries of the people and the cries of the earth, caused by the corruption and war brought on by Aziel and the feeding frenzy of Semihaza's giant children, reached all the way to the gates of heaven. The souls of the deceased begged the archangels to petition El Elyon for help. Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel went to the Lord of the Ages and said, "Look what Aziel has done. He revealed secrets which should have been kept in heaven." This corruption mirrors that of Ahriman in Zoroastrianism, but the forbidden knowledge aspect is something new. They then mention Semihaza and the other angels having sex with human women, and how the earth is now filled with giants. After this, the four archangels accuse El Elyon of permitting these things, as well as allowing Semihaza to rule over the angels who cause such destruction. Now, this accusatory tone directed at God concerning the rampant bloodshed on earth may seem out of place in Scripture, but we see it laid out again, almost verbatim, in Revelation 6:10. Such an open rebuke of the Creator would not have been tolerated in the Old Testament, but was allowed in the New, giving us another example of commonality between Christianity and Enoch. El Elyon, the Great Holy One, responds by telling Uriel to warn Noah of the impending destruction of the earth and to give the man instructions on how to survive the coming cataclysm and how to preserve future generations, as we see in Genesis 6, verses 13 to 14. Raphael is given the task of binding Aziel and casting him into a dark pit in the desert. The hole is then to be filled with jagged rocks, and the angel is to live there in total darkness. This scene will be referenced in Revelation 20, verses 1 through 3. Then on the day of judgment, Aziel will be hurled into fire and destroyed, as we see in Revelation 19, verse 20. Following this, the earth will be healed of the angel's corruption, and not everyone will die because of the secrets which were revealed by the Watchers. This is referenced in Romans chapter 8, verses 18 to 21. To Aziel they ascribe all the sins of the earth, which is why the sins of the world are placed in a goat and sent to the pit in the wilderness in the scapegoat ritual mentioned earlier. Gabriel is given the task of instigating war between the demigod children of the Watchers and the corrupt men on earth. He is to cause them to destroy one another and each other, and to shorten their lifespan so the earth can be cleansed sooner. Genesis chapter 6 verses 7 through 8. Finally, Michael is to bind Semahazah and his followers who had sex with the human women to father the Nephilim. Their fate is to be bound and sealed beneath the hills of the earth for 70 generations, until the day of judgment, when they too will be destroyed in fire, like Aziel. Notice the striking similarities between the fates of Aziel and Semahazah. Both are bound underground for the time being and will later be cast into fire and destroyed. These are two versions of the same story. One story gradually split over time to become a story of Aziel and a story of Semahazah. And here in the Book of Enoch, the two separate stories are being merged back together. The evil of earth shall all be destroyed, and truth shall be a blessing. The righteous shall survive and have 1,000 children, and shall know peace. This is the reward for being a good person during the time of judgment, the day of tribulation. All of the nations of earth will praise God, and all defilement, sin, punishment, and torment will vanish. This is a vision of all that is wrong with the world being put right, all of the current struggles of the believers being laid to rest. The blessing of the righteous and the emphasis on truth, as well as the punishment by fire of the wicked, is first seen in Zoroastrianism. These elements are taken directly from the eschatology of the Persian religion. Now after this time, the earth shall be restored, and nature will flourish, and all of creation will be cleansed of sin and wickedness and corruption, and there shall never again be another flood of the earth. This promise to never again flood the earth is seen in Genesis chapter 9, verse 11. So Enoch has told us how the earth and stars were orderly and obeyed the commandments. Then there were transgressors among them. He was given a vision of what had occurred, Semahazah and his 200 fallen stars having sex with human women to corrupt creation, or Aziel bringing forbidden knowledge to corrupt the world. We should point out here that in the Eden story, forbidden knowledge was linked with sex and reproduction, and that led directly to their punishment. Enoch is then given a vision of what is to occur in the future to set the world to rights. Just as Adam and Eve were cast into the wilderness, so too will be Aziel and Semahazah. After this, Enoch leaves the earth to travel into heaven, just as we see him do in the book of Genesis, making him the first person in the Bible to ascend bodily to heaven. And that is where we will pick up in the next episode. Real quick, I want to give a special shout out to Mike for the book you recently sent over. I'll be digging into that in the near future. If you'd like to support the show, head over to facebook.com/DragonsandGenesis, where you'll find a pinned post with a link to my Amazon wishlist. The books on that list will help research for upcoming episodes. Don't forget to give us a like and get your friends over to the page. Head over to the website at dragonsandgenesis.com for a list of books and lectures that you can use to further your own understanding of Near Eastern mythology, as well as a contacts page, and of course, give us a good review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. And as always, thank you for listening.